GTT. Not sure if your studio's audio sounds competitive? A sound check by George the Tech removes all doubts and explains the next steps. Audiobooks, podcasts, voiceovers. For content creators, we do it all. New customers get 20% off their first service with a coupon code on your screen.
George the Tech.
When did you first record Andrew Peters?
I met Andrew at Triple M in Perth, so it probably would have been then, so 94, 95.
Oh, wow. You guys go way back.
He was actually the promotions and marketing director.
Wow.
And chief cocaine snorter. So that was a long time ago. Hello, Andrew. Yes, I know. I do love you, though.
George the Tech.
Hey, everybody. George the Tech. I'm getting to flip things around today and get to interview one of my co-hosts of a podcast that I've been working on for years called the Pro Audio Suite. And it's a great opportunity to do this because this gentleman has been in the trenches of audio, radio, production, direction, a lot of things for a very long time, just a little out of sync time-wise from us because he's from down under. Yeah. And joining me today is Darren Robinson, also known as Robbo. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, George. Yeah, nice to see you, and weird to be sort of on the receiving end of your questions for a change.
Yeah, well, it's about time. You know, this is a really great way to cross-pollinate and share what we know of our friends in the business, and that's the whole point of what we're doing here today. So you and I have been doing a show for a while together, so most of what I know about you and your skill set is from the last 7 or so years, and It's been great. Let's flash back a little bit. I know you've got 30 plus years of experience working in pro audio. Mm-hmm. Where did you cut your teeth in pro audio? Were you still in high school or prior to college and all that?
High school, I was actually going to be a chef, believe it or not. I was actually booked into catering college, so here in Australia, schooling goes from kindergarten through to year 12, and then year 12 is when you graduate, and from there you decide if you want to go on to uni or whatever. About year 10 or year 11, I had a love of cooking and had myself booked into a catering college, and in year 12 I was sort of asked, what do you want to do for work experience? Because everybody in year 12 does work experience, and I thought, I'm going to be in a kitchen for the rest of my life. I don't need to do that. What else might I like to do? And I sort of thought, I love music. You know, my next love was music. And I thought, I'll go check out a radio station. That'd be interesting. And for the first 4 days of the 5 days at the radio station, I was bored to tears because it was, a day in sales and a day in the newsroom. And on the last day, it was a day in the production studio. And I remember the moment that I sort of walked into reception and, hang on a minute, Richard will call you down. And she said to me, look, Richard's down in the studio. Richard Monk was the guy who was the producer at the time. We're actually still mates. And I walked down and I remember vividly opening the door, the big heavy door to the studio, and looked in, and there was the 16-track multi-track in the corner and this big mixing desk and these massive speakers built into the walls. And I just went, I'm not going to be a chef. Just from that very moment, it was like, this is what I want to do.
That's fantastic. I wonder if they made you wait till day 5 to test you and see, is this guy going to keep coming back?
Yeah,
because we know on day 5 when he sees that studio,
he's going to do it. Yeah, it's interesting though, because I spent some time in the on-air studio, obviously, and even that didn't make me, I sort of went, yeah, okay, it's cool. I'm hanging out with, these guys I listen to on the radio, but it wasn't until that very moment, walking into a production studio, that I just knew.
So it was a radio station production studio. That was your first taste of that.
That was my first taste
and
of it. Yeah.
Was that the norm of that era, was to have that much equipment, gear, console, and all that in a radio production studio?
Yeah, radio's a bit different here, and was even more different sort of back then, Big consoles and 16 tracks. There was 2 production studios. There was a dedicated commercial production studio, which would usually have the breakfast show, I think you guys call it mornings, the morning show, doing their production. As things were going to air, they'd be making live sketches and, editing interviews and all that sort of stuff. But when that finished, the commercial producer would come in and take over, and he'd produce all the station-produced commercials. But then there was also another studio, the main sort of studio, which is where all the imaging was done.
Was that a windowless production room? Or could you see in?
No, well, Today FM, where this place was, and funnily enough, ended up being my second ever radio station. I ended up working at the same building, but the booth was in the corner, and so it was like a shared booth, and then both studios sort of looked onto that from there. But you could sort of wave to Tim in the imaging studio when you were working and all that sort of stuff, or do this number or
of course
whatever, So it was good fun.
Taunt each other.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my first taste and my wow moment, I suppose. Yeah.
Did you have a trial by fire moment? Because I know I did when I did live radio sports broadcast. It was very much trial by fire.
I had plenty of those, but I can tell you my most embarrassing moment was actually on my very first day at my very first radio station. So after Today FM, I went away and my dad made me do my butcher's apprenticeship with him because he owned a butcher's and all that sort of stuff. And he was a country boy and sort of said, if you're getting into radio, it's not a very secure job, so you need a trade behind your belt. And long story short, I ended up landing the karting room role at another Sydney radio station, an AMer called 2SM. And for those uninitiated, analog karts were a continuous loop, a cassette, basically.
Looked a little bit like an 8-track tape if you're old enough to
remember
an
8-track
See,
8-track was huge
cartridge
in
and
the
it goes
States.
chunk into a
Yeah,
machine.
absolutely. And what it does is it has a stop pulse at the beginning of the track. So when it gets back around to the beginning of the loop, the kart machine sees that and stops it. So the next time the announcer hits the button, it plays. So
every time you use it, it's queued up. Is that the idea? Every time you pull it out, it's ready to go.
They'd have music on that sometimes, but mostly it was just commercials and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, my job was to transfer stuff from quarter-inch tape to the cartridge and sort of get them ready to go to air.
And you reuse them a certain number of times?
Oh,
until
yeah.
It sounded so shit.
Yeah. You'd end up looking at the tape going, okay, it's probably time now. And you'd have to rewind it. So you'd pull the cartridge apart and you'd pull the tape out and you had a big pancake of quarter-inch.
Oh.
I don't know if you remember those, George, but they were...
I never worked with those, no.
Okay, well, a pancake was just...
The raw tape on a giant...
It had a hub. It didn't have the, like a spool
flange.
would have. A spool would have the flanges on either side. Well, the pancake did. If you dropped it, it was just tape everywhere. So that was another sort of challenge. But yeah, so by the amount of tape you put onto the cartridge, obviously you knew how long the cartridge was going to be. So
okay. So the length of that tape you loaded in the cartridge was pretty important. If it's a 30-second, if it's a 1 minute, whatever.
And also, so if I was doing music, for example, I would actually make a new card every time because you want the ability when the song's finished, you don't want to have another 2 minutes of thing for
no
the
leader
thing
or
to
no
play through because
or,
the announcer might want to get that out to get an ad in. So you want to have only like 5-10 seconds of silence so it gets back to the start, stops, and the announcer can drag it out and chuck the next event in. When you've only got 6 cart decks in a studio, that's pretty critical. And 6 sounds a lot, but when you're on air, it's really not.
Oh, man.
Especially if you're a breakfast show with sound effects and music beds and all that sort of stuff going on as well.
So everything you wanted to hear on the show, live on the radio, had to come off of a cart, pretty much.
Not
Unless
everything. It was sort of
a vinyl record or
it was the early days of CDs, so it was sort of that CD was starting to make its impact. Like there was certainly a music library that was full of CDs.
But you didn't necessarily get to burn your own CD maybe at the early days.
No, there was no burning CDs back then. No, we're talking 1989.
Right.
So it was right at that sort of cusp of the death of vinyl and the beginning of CD. So
what was your first DAW then? When did you start? I mean, you probably dabbled in stuff, but what was the first one that you really used to make a living on?
The first DAW I made a living on was a thing called Studio Frame, and that was at Triple M in Adelaide in 1996.
Huh.
That was a weird choice of the guy who was there before me. We've actually had him on the show, David Rains, who now mixes feature films and stuff. He put that in, and it was actually built for feature films. It was only 8 tracks, and there was certainly no such thing as plugins back then, 1996. So you just put it in, and then those 8 tracks came back through an analog console. But the first one
it was just a digital tape, quote unquote.
It was basically just a
That's
digital 8-track. That was pretty much all it did. But it was massive. It was, like huge.
And probably took up really expensive.
Massive big rack space. Oh, no doubt. I didn't pay for it. Obviously, the station did.
Tens of maybe even hundreds.
I remember turning up to Triple M in Adelaide. I went from Triple M in Perth to Triple M in Adelaide and sat there looking at this thing, scratching my head. But then once I dived into it, I discovered this world of, oh my God, you can do that. Oh, look, reverse. Cool. I don't have to sort of drop something down to quarter-inch tape and turn it around now and play it. Yeah, exactly. And stuttering, stuttering was another thing. I don't have to put it down on quarter-inch tape and then splice it together half a dozen times. I can just throw it in once and copy-paste. It's done. Oh my God, look at that.
Revelation. Well, I mean, I didn't even know you were doing things like stutter edits on tape and literally splicing together.
Mate.
Oh my gosh. Jeez.
I learnt my craft in radio from a guy called Jeff Thomas, who was the network production director of Triple M at the time. This is when did I land at Triple M? 92, I ended up at Triple M. And Tomo was sort of just coming into the limelight then. But Tomo he got poached from Triple M by Kiss in LA and was the production director there for a while. And then he got stolen from there. Richard Branson actually paid for Tomo to fly from LA to London when he was launching Virgin. Tomo got off the plane, got taken out to dinner to a U2 concert, and then taken to Capitol and basically handed a piece of paper and said, how much do you want to do the job to re-image Capitol? And then he went from there to a couple of other stations. And then when Howard Stern landed on Sirius, it was actually a condition of Howard's contract that Jeff Thomas did his imaging. So
no kidding.
So yeah, Tomo's a bit of a legend in the industry.
For sure.
So I worked directly with Tomo for a short time, but most of my time, I was the production manager of Triple M in Perth, and he was the network production manager. So I'd be sending him tapes and stuff like that. And because this was in the day before Zoom or anything like that, so I'd be sending him tapes and DATs and stuff, and he'd be listening. And
no FTP, no high-speed internet,
like that. And he'd jump on the phone, and we'd make a time, and we'd spend an hour every week. Every Monday morning, we'd have the Tomo Robbo hour, and he sort of mentored me. And so the stuttering and all that sort of stuff, but that's where all the stuttering came from, because
How impossible would it be for you to scrape up an air check or something from that era?
God. I've got some promos lying around. In fact, I do another podcast called The Imaging Hangout with some guys in London from Imaging Blueprint. And I was actually just playing a Guns N' Roses promo that I built on the back of it, some advice from Tomo.
Circa early 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, that would have been like 93, the first time Guns N' Roses toured Australia. And Tomo was the one who said to me, and the Tomo's influence on that was, mate, go out to the local video store and hire because there was no live recording of Guns N' Roses at that stage, and so go out and hire a couple of videos, and we're talking like VHS back then, take them home and get some stuff of Axl going, time to die, and all that sort of stuff, and use that. And that's, that was his influence on that. That's what we were talking about in this episode. Do you want to edit it in? Because I can send it to you.
We could fly it in right now.
January 30, 1993. Axl and the boys are back with an attitude to die for. Triple M and Coca-Cola proudly present Guns N' Roses live at Eastern Creek in the concert of a lifetime. And now, we're proud to announce, as special guests from the US, Skid Row. And the original lineup, Rose Tattoo. January 30. Eastern Creek. Tickets are still available for Guns N' Roses Live and Loud with Skid Row and Rose Tattoo. Presented by Frontier, Coca-Cola, and FM 105. Triple M.
That was great. Ha ha ha. I'm pretending I just heard it, but I didn't. I can't wait to hear it.
Mate, it was a long time ago. Wow, I'm surprised. But yeah, look, I've got DATs and DATs of all that stuff. That was the only way to hang on to stuff, was to have it on DAT. I find it so much easier to lose digital files than I do to lose a physical piece of...
Have you stuck a DAT tape into the machine and been heartbroken that it was not working anymore?
Yeah, and thank goodness it wasn't stuff that was really important, but I still do this. If you look at my Pro Tools sessions, any of my Pro Tools sessions, especially radio imaging, there's all the tracks and mix buses and audio buses and stuff here, but then down the bottom there's usually 4 or 5 tracks, and so that's where everything comes out. So
that's your mix downs? Or
yeah,
stems?
my mix downs. So basically there's one track that records the full mix, there's one track that records just the music, there's another track that records any sound design that I've made or used or whatever, and voiceover as well. And basically, so I record all of those at once, just hit record, and one run through, I've got all that stuff. And then export those, cut them up, and stash them away on hard drives. And, if you're in the middle of a promo and you need a liner or something, and you've got to be diligent in archiving this stuff.
Oh my gosh, we have to be a librarian.
Well, yeah, but rather than having to remake this stuff, it's there and it's made, and you can just drag it in if you want to reuse it. And that was another thing I learned from Tomo. Tomo used to have dats and dats of stuff. And we were talking on the show the other day with Dave. Is it Dave, the voiceover?
Yeah, David K.
Yeah, Dave K. And I was sort of saying one of the things I get sort of commented on, especially in sort of advertising agency sessions and stuff like that, where they're not used to people working fast, is how fast I work. But basically because in advertising land, you've got all day to make a couple of TV commercials. But in radio land, you're working on this promo, but there's 6 other people waiting out the door to go, hey, can you make this and this? So you've got to make it sound good, but you still got to do it fast. So you find all these workarounds. And that's the beautiful thing about having a background in radio when you sort of get into other sort of audio production work.
I agree. I have a degree of audio background. I didn't work in production. I worked in engineering. But the ability to think on your feet and solve problems rapidly was a huge part of it. And I still carry that with me today. But on the other hand, being good with people and trying to understand what creatives need and not be too technical where I lose people completely. That's not my goal, is to really get inside the head of the actor, right? That's a big part of it. Yeah. So when did the interest in working with voice actors become really emboldened? I mean, you're going to be working with them all the time in imaging, right? I mean, you're recording voices. When did you first record Andrew Peters?
Oh, God. When did I first record Andrew Peters? I met Andrew at Triple M in Perth, so it probably would have been then, so 94, 95.
Oh, wow. You guys go way back.
He was actually the promotions and marketing director. Wow. And chief cocaine snorter. But that was a long time ago. Hello, Andrew. Yes, I know. I do love you, though.
It's no secret.
It's not. Look, I mean, we're talking rock radio. Come on. I don't think I need to spell out what went on in the after hours. Yeah. So, but it certainly doesn't anymore.
Mom and Dad, by the way, I never did any of that. I never probably even saw it. It was just beyond that threshold of time.
It was good for the creative process. That's the excuse.
I only heard stories. But anyway. So you worked with him there. You were in the same building?
Yeah, he was basically, my studio was in the corner of the building, and then there was someone office next to me, and then the next office was the promotions and marketing office, and he was just in there. So I would always be dragging him in. Can you just voice this for me? Or,
But at that stage, he would have already been an established on-air host
for decades. Yeah. And and you would have to ask Andrew how he landed in promotions and marketing, because I'm sure I have, but I couldn't tell you the story. But
obviously I need to interview him coming up soon. So
well, you should. And I think he went back to the UK or something like that for a while, because he's from the UK. I think he went back there and then he came back, and it was sort of his first gig back in Australia, and he was just looking for anything, and he ended up landing that gig. So he was very good at it though. I remember we used to have beach parties and all that sort of stuff that he'd organise, and he'd get a live band down on the beach at Subiaco or somewhere like that in Perth, and there'd be thousands of screaming Triple M fans who dancing to Boom Crash Opera or one of the local sort of rock acts and stuff like that. So he did a great job.
Well, I know from Andrew that he's very good at getting things. And that is one of the reasons why we are all enjoying very nice gear from our supporter, Austrian Audio.
Yes,
you guys are seeing those mics and headphones right now. That was an Andrew connection, was it not?
It was. He met someone from somewhere from Austrian Audio and rang me the next day and said, we've got to get these guys on as sponsor because I really like their microphones. So he was on it straight away.
And he made it happen. I would have to think we are if not their only podcast, sponsored show, if not maybe one of their first. I mean, I've never heard of any other product or show that they're a marquee sponsor of. So that was a pretty big deal for us. It always has been, and they've been loyal to us for several years now.
We've so much gear. Seriously, I mean, I had a pair of Hi-X 65 headphones that I loved to mix in, and they were stolen out of my car, and without even thinking twice, all of a sudden another pair turned up, and I certainly wasn't expecting that. But they've been more than generous, and
absolutely.
And ironically, their gear is more than good. So that's kind of, I guess the two go together, don't they?
Yeah, the microphones are absolutely stellar, top notch. There's no doubt. And the fact that we all got to use those same microphones together is pretty damn awesome. But I know this now from working from a few people in radio over the years of how that's a certain set of skills at getting the things you need. Because in radio, as a radio on air, it's all about perks. It's not really the pay.
Yeah.
Right?
It's about what else you can drag out of it. Yeah. There was, the amount of free pizzas and bottles of bourbon and stuff that would turn up to a studio on a Friday night because, the announcer was in there going, I'm feeling a bit hungry right now. I'll tell you what, the first person to get me a pizza, I'll give you a plug.
Andrew obviously knows how to do that.
Oh, he's the champion at that.
He is the champion. So it's been great having him as a host for sure, for a lot of reasons. So over the years working with Andrew, you guys had this rapport. I mean, many years now have to lapse before we move to the next chapter, really, which would be when you decided to get into doing a show together, a podcast together.
Ooh, yeah, I think we were doing it for a couple of years before the Pro Audio Suite. Andrew, I was doing another podcast, which I loved, which was ironically with Andrew's boss at Triple M at the time, a guy called Gary Birtwistle, who got out of radio. Gary now spends his time tripping around the country talking to businesses about creativity and using your mind and all this sort of stuff. That was right up my alley. So when Gary sort of said, I've got this idea for the Mojo radio show, we talked to people about creativity and motivation and all that sort of stuff. And I was sort of right there. So I needed a voiceover I didn't have to pay. So Andrew was the first port of call and he became the voice of the Mojo radio show. And Andrew probably wasn't really across podcasting and he sort of went, it's really cool. We should do something, there's nothing out there for voiceover, especially in Australia. And so we started, I can't remember what it was called. Something
VO Radio Show?
The VO Radio Show. That's it. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was the Mojo Radio Show and the VO Radio Show. Creative thinking went into that title. But so it was just him and me, and we were sort of talking to people like yourself and Robert and, anyone else who would sort of spend the time to come on the show. And one Christmas, we were talking about doing a Christmas episode and we went, well, we should probably have a couple other people with us. And our two most memorable interviews from that year were you and Robert. And so by chance, we sort of, you both said yes and the four of us went on and we got off that episode and Andrew went, fuck, that was amazing. That worked so well. And we sort of went, well, there's two audio engineers. There's also, Robert is not only a good audio engineer, he's also like the tech geek, with making plugins and, all this sort of stuff. And then there's you, who's got the studio nous, Andrew, who's just the very good voiceover artist. All of a sudden, you've got this mix of knowledge and we went, we need to do something here, and reached out to you guys. And 8 years later, here we are, having this conversation.
And so a lot of gray hair.
Well, a lot less hair too, yeah. But I'm not sure that's just from the show. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. I look forward to our recording because it's something. We spend our lives at the behest of clients, and it's nice to be able to sort of just do something that you want to do.
I was really impressed from the from the get-go of how good the production was, or is. It is, still is. And I know how much time it would take for me to get a show mixed and edited that sounds that good. I can only imagine it would take you less time than it would take me, but let's say it's an hour-long episode, which they are occasionally. Yeah. How much time?
Well,
let's not talk about video. Let's just talk about the audio stuff.
Forget the
video.
How
much time were you putting into the audio stuff?
Yeah. 2 days ago, we did an hour and a half interview with Derek from Vanguard. Take the video side out of it, just the audio. Like, I've got all the tracks laid up now against the video. Take all that out of it. I've still spent so far about 2 hours on the edit, and I'm about a third of the way through. So the thing for me with this is there's no reason why when we finished recording I couldn't just sort of bounce it down to a stereo file, stick a compressor over the top and make it sound okay. But something I learned from the Mojo radio show, from talking to people who are at the top of their game and extremely good at what they do, is the realization that every single thing I put out of this studio is a reflection on me.
Yeah.
So if the first thing someone hears is this highly compressed, sounds okay, but, could be heaps better piece of audio, what sort of first impression am I making? So my intent is for everything that goes out of this place for me to be able to go, I'm happy with that. Get the big tick of approval. And
if you're not happy with that, you can say this episode produced by George Whittam of George
that's
the
why
Tech.
there's the escape. That's why there's the escape route in the intro that sort of goes, edited by Andrew Peters, technical support from George the Tech Whittam,
exactly.
blah blah blah. Brought to you, or recorded on Source Connect. There's all these excuses that I can
glitches by Robert Marshall.
George, I don't know what George was doing that day. And
Bong rips by
exactly. And thankfully, Robert also gives me the perfect out because he loves to spend his time thinking about ways to make himself sound as crappy as he can.
Oh my
So I got to work hard to get him to sound good. So
the episode he did from the train will never live down. Where he dialed into a box over the phone. He used his phone to dial, and he was phone patching into something, and then that was patching
relayed
into
to somewhere else. And well, that episode I actually just left alone because I just went, there's no saving this. To be fair, if he's supposed to be on a train and all the rest of it, then the fact that he's sounding crappy, we can probably get away with. But look, and that's sort of been my philosophy with everything though, is I don't want something going out that I go, oh fuck, did you really hear that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for those listening that or watching that are podcasters or thinking of podcasting, there's a degree of perfection and expertise that is far beyond the pale for most people doing a podcast. And what Robbo is doing in post here is not typical for many podcasts because there is so much time involved and it doesn't warrant the time. But it's his calling card, and it's something that's so important to him and it's important to us as well. So, when I set up people's podcast workflows and teach them how to record, I don't expect them to invest the same amount of time that you might invest in our show, Robbo. It's just you're doing it because it is your calling card. You're doing it it's your brand as a producer, and hopefully you also enjoy it.
Well, I do enjoy it. I mean, obviously I do audio because I do enjoy it, but it's also all of our credibility because it's hard for you as someone who has your expertise to sit there and go, well, if you want your room to sound good, this is what you've got to do. But on your podcast, which is your business card, on your podcast, you're all off mic like this, blah, blah. You can't do that. You can't expect people to buy what you're selling if what you're selling sounds like shit. And
I know. It blows my mind in all the years of hosting our shows. I did the VOBS and EWABs before that, East West Audio Body Shop, for years. And it just blew me away how often we'd have guests on the show who were not prepared at all, not only to get video together, but also audio, and how it just, people don't make the connection as to how important the sound and the quality is of their appearance. It's fascinating, actually.
Well, there's plenty of studies out there that show that, the worse your audio gets in terms of quality, the less people believe you too. There's a bunch of studies. There's one actually that I quote all the time that comes from, it was a collaboration between, is it USC?
Probably USC.
USC
USC
and
a big research university.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the universities here in Brisbane, they did a stack of research, and it basically, if you look at the graphs, the worse the audio sounded, the more people sort of went, I don't believe this guy, and the less longer they listened and
believe and or connect to the messaging. Right?
But believability is also a big part of it. They're not just connecting, but they're also not believing it.
Yeah. I remember you telling us that on one of our episodes, and that has stuck with me. And I use that, and I tell people that when they're thinking about their setups. Definitely. I did a talk at PodFest in January here in the States, in Orlando, and I sent it to somebody. I was like, the audio quality, is it everything? Not necessarily. We all know content is king, but if the quality is not to a certain bar, the distraction of listening to that audio is so... it's the believability is sort of a more esoteric thing, but just if it's so poor that it's literally distracting and uncomfortable to listen to, well, that's not happening. So I love that you put that kind of effort into the show. And my gosh, how many different ways have we recorded the show together?
Well, how many different ways has Robert recorded the show? That's probably more to the point. We've tried a bunch of different formats. I'm sort of stuck on the one we do at the moment when we're doing audio only. I mean, I think the fact that we sort of still meet on a video platform and use that to sort of see each other and communicate, but then in the background record off Source Connect into Pro Tools and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, another good question would be how many times has my template changed in 8 years? Because I tell you what, keeping up with what we're doing becomes a freaking nightmare. But
it's an interesting, unique situation when one of the co-hosts is also one of the manufacturers of the software that is used to do remote production. You have an extraordinary pressure on you to make use of said software.
And get it right.
No matter what. No matter whether it's working well or not, you still feel like you have a responsibility to do that, right? And that can be challenging. But what has been the biggest change in video notwithstanding, what's changed in how we produce the show in the last few months that stands out?
There's that, the answer to that. We were talking about it before we started recording. Source Connect 4 is...
So what makes Source Connect 4 a departure from years past?
Just everything, just the ease of everything. I mean, the queue manager, is now so much easier and it's visually more, easy to understand. I didn't know what the queue manager did when I first met Robert. Yeah. And now I know what it does. And, there was frustrations with that. Looking at it now, for a voice actor, to be able to go, I'm thinking of people who maybe aren't so savvy. Yeah. It's now clear. It sort of goes, okay, well, this is what needed restoring and this has been restored and blah, blah, blah. I think the fact that I don't have to patch a million things, if I wanted to, I can, each guest on my Source Connect 4 window can have their own inputs and outputs, or if I want, I can just make that just the one.
It's a far less complex. We actually do a video on the Pro Audio Suite where you talk through and break down using Source Connect 4 in your Pro Tools session, right? Yeah. And we get to show how incredibly complex your original template was so that you could record 3 remote talent to separate tracks all over Source Connect 3.
And still send to Google Meets and listen back from Google Meets and do this and do that.
That's right. Absolutely. And then you bring in guests from time to time who are not going to have access or use Source Connect, so they might be on Source Nexus or Source Connect Now before that, or or whatever, and make all that work together. So that has all gotten much more streamlined, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this wasn't on Source Connect 4, but I did a session on regular Source Connect last year sometime for one of the agencies here. And I had 2 voice talent on Source Connect. So they were on my Source Connect and Source Connect A accounts. Then I had the account director and the creative and one of the clients in at Saatchi's on a Zoom call. The director was on the phone at the airport in Brisbane. And I had to bring all that together. And I look back now and I look at, Source Nexus now and I look at Source Connect 4 and I go, how much easier would that have been than this switchboard nightmare of trying to monitor a million things and making sure nothing's dropping out and everyone's hearing what they should be hearing.
Do you remember what you were doing for the phone patch part? How were you doing the phone patch?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have a Roadcaster. So I just threw him up through there and added him into the mix.
Were you actually using your mobile phone?
Yeah, he was on his mobile phone. So so I just brought him in on the Bluetooth in the Roadcaster and added him into the mix. So
yeah, that's the sound router, right?
Like a routing thing,
gets things around the studio. Well, my gosh, I can't believe according to the timer, we've been recording for 37 minutes, which blows me away because it feels like 15.
You and me.
It's been so fun, but I want to let you know that you guys watching that if you want to work with Robbo, you can. If you're a voice actor and you'd love to get a new demo, that's something that Robbo is doing, right?
Yeah, it's something I fell into a couple of years ago and it started to grow. And Matt Calrick got in touch with me and after we'd had him on an episode.
Super talent.
He's amazing voiceover. And he got in touch with me and said, I need a new demo. And I went, okay, good. I think, what about this person? This person? He went, no, I want you to do it. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Well, blah, blah, blah. So we wrote a few scripts and put some stuff together and ended up making a demo that he was really pleased with. And
what was the style of demo that he was doing?
The reason he wanted me to do it was he's an Aussie. He's a Brisbane boy who lives in Canada now and does most of his work in the States. He's got this amazing ability to do an American accent that he can just turn on and turn off. So he basically walks into the studio and gets all this work. But anyway, he wanted to, even though he's based in Canada, he wanted to get an Australian agent and get back into the Australian industry. So he wanted to do an Australian accent. demo, which is why he sort of wanted to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
There's people here that do demos to varying degrees, but he sort of knew me and trusted me, I suppose. I never really asked him why. But I managed to come up with in my own special way, came up with a little process that I kind of thought was neat. And Matt said to me when we were sort of talking about it, he said, you should, do it. And I went, oh, because I'm the world's worst, my own worst enemy, because I sort of think everything I do is crap no matter how much time I spend on it. I went, really? And he went, yeah.
Your harshest critic.
My own harshest critic, absolutely. So anyway, look, basically fell into it and sort of went, okay, well, I'll give it a go. And since then I've sort of been slowly but surely building a nice little sort of arsenal of demos that I've made for people and having a lot of fun along the way. So, and meeting some amazing voice actors who are doing amazing work out there without any representation. I kind of feel like the days of the agent are sort of numbered because they're doing some amazing work for some really big clients who don't have an agent. You know, a good demo and a good ability to do a great audition. I think put those two things together and you're on a winner.
Especially in the States, the audition is everything. So tell me how someone could work with you if they're looking for something a little different. And would they be your ideal customer, be someone with a degree of experience and under their belt already?
I try to, yeah. Look, I'm not the cheapest person on the block. I'm certainly not the most expensive.
Probably not.
But I kind of, and especially when you take in the Australian dollar into account too, that's the other thing.
There you go, guys. That's like a 30% discount built in right there.
Before you even get a code or anything. That's right, that, exactly. So the website is probably the best place to land, and just go to voodoosound.com.au. voodoosound.com.au. There's a dedicated voiceover demos page there. I offer a free 30-minute chat if you want to sort of go through the demo you've got now and talk about how we can do it. But to answer your question, I have no hard and fast rules, but usually the people that I'm doing demos for have some amount of experience. Only because of what I charge, I want to be able to sleep at night, and I want to make a demo that's going to sort of be able to help. And if their chops aren't already there, I'm not a coach. I'm a good director from 36 years of sitting behind but I'm not a coach. So, and there's a difference. I want to sleep at night. So I don't want to take money off people when I know that what I'm doing is going to get them a great sounding demo, but they're not going to be able to walk into a studio. And this is my biggest thing, if I can take 2 seconds.
Sure. Because
this is one thing that I find a lot of people forget about is with their demos is people do these demos where they spend days, like days and days and days with little, taking little chunks for this take and little chunks from this take and piecing together this amazing piece of audio. But then they walk into the studio or they get on a Source Connect session and the client goes, hey, that spot for Pantene on your demo, that's the read we want. And then they can't do it. And this actually happened to me about 1.5 years ago. We got a voice talent in from a really well-established agency here in Sydney. And they were basically told, this is the read you want. They were there for the hour that they were paid for and got nowhere near it. And the moment she walked out the door, it was like, okay, who else can we get? You know what I mean? And this is Saatchi and Saatchi, okay? This is like a major, so you've just burnt yourself. That's right. You've just burnt yourself for the rest of your career because you will always be that person, that person. Oh, no, no. Anybody else but them, you know what I mean? Yeah. That's one thing to be really careful of. And so that's why I say when I'm sort of middle of the food chain up,
gotcha.
That's probably it. Because
and then genres, mostly commercial or?
Mostly commercial. I'm working on a narration one at the moment. I've done a promo one just recently for a client. Obviously, promos are right up my alley. So yeah. But I've worked with a couple of people in the UK and the US. Mimo Sauceda is a client, and also Matt Calrick, obviously. They're the two that come to mind. I think there was one other that I've done a demo for.
Seasoned pros, they are.
So yeah, look, it's a lot of fun.
Well, we're going to be doing a lot more together.
We got a lot of time.
And we're both working real hard to shill these suckers too.
I know. Hang on.
I got up very early this morning, 6 a.m, to be sitting in my chair for sound and video check at 6:30 a.m. To be grilled over this thing for 15, 20 minutes this morning. And they really liked it. The folks on that show really appreciated what it is,
Yeah.
And it was a lot of like, wow, that's great. What a cool thing.
Well, you know why? Because it's built from the perspective of 5 of us, including Michael, who genuinely wanted to come up with something that was helpful to voiceover artists. It's not it's not something we did because we wanted to make money, and it's certainly not something we did because we needed less stress in our lives, but it was a lot of fun. And I think there's a product there that just, you know, for even someone who's starting out in the industry is just so easy to use and so
it's
intuitive.
Talent forward.
I did my first two-way session with it with AP a couple of days ago. We recorded an episode of the podcast. He and I and we did the podcast using that, and I was sort of showing my end and he was showing his. And literally all I had to do was, you know, we talk about Source Nexus and Source Connect 4 and all that sort of stuff, but all I had to do was plug 2 USB ports in and bang, it was set up. It was so easy.
It's been a great time having you on. It's been so fun, and I look forward to so many fun new shows ahead for the two of us.
I know.
And all the great things with the Passport VO that we're going to be seeing in the future as companies discover how freaking cool it is and how useful
I think
it is.
so.
Thanks for your time today, mate. I know it's
always
morning and
fun.
It's evening here, and we'll be talking again soon. Everybody, Darren Robbo Robertson, thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
George the Tech.